I used to believe in the simple math of the corporate world. Do good work, tell the truth, protect the company's interests. You'd think the result would be recognition. Maybe even respect. Acknowledgement. At the very least. I was wrong. So wrong. Instead of a commendation, I got a cardboard box. Instead of a thank you, I got shown the door. Fired. Not because I was lazy. Not because I screwed up some major project. Not because my numbers didn't add up. No, my numbers added up too well. I was fired because I had the audacity, the gall, to point out that our esteemed chief financial officer, Lorne Keller, was feeding the board of directors a steaming pile of fabricated data. Cooked books. Massaged numbers. Call it what you will, it was a lie designed to paint a rosy picture that simply wasn't real. And today I'm going to tell you exactly how that happened. How I went from being a loyal, senior employee to an outcast overnight. And how, just 6 months later, the very people who threw me out came crawling back, begging me to return, checkbook wide open, when their carefully constructed house of cards started to violently collapse around them. This isn't just a story about getting fired. It's about the high cost of truth and the eventual, satisfying price of vindication. For 9 years, Stratton Dynamics was my professional home. A mid-sized tech firm headquartered right here in Chicago. Making waves, or so we thought, in data analytics. I started there fresh out of grad school. Nearly a decade ago, as a junior data analyst. I kept my head down. Learned the ropes. Put in the hours. I wasn't there to make friends. Necessarily, though I respected my colleagues. I was there to do the job. And do it well. And I did. I climbed the ladder, rung by rung, eventually landing the role of head of internal audit. My job, in plain English, was to be the company's watchdog. To sniff out inconsistencies, verify claims, ensure everything was above board. It's not a role that wins you popularity contests. You're paid to be skeptical, meticulous, maybe even a little abrasive. I wasn't known for mincing words or sugar-coating uncomfortable truths. Diplomacy wasn't my strong suit, accuracy was. If something was wrong, I said it was wrong. Clearly, directly, no ambiguity. Some called me blunt. Maybe I was, but in my line of work, ambiguity can cost millions. Integrity, I believed, was non-negotiable. I remember the day it all started to unravel with perfect, chilling clarity. It was a Monday morning, early October, gray skies outside, matching the dull fluorescent hum of the main conference room. Quarterly review meeting. The air was thick with that specific blend of stale coffee and forced optimism that permeates corporate gatherings. Lorne Keller, our CFO, was at the podium, silver hair, expensive suit, a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He clicked through his PowerPoint slides, brimming with self-congratulation. And as you can see, he announced, gesturing to a graph showing a sharp upward trend. Q3 revenues are up a stellar 12% year-over-year. A low murmur of approval went through the room. Executives nodded sagely. Barry Winslow, the CEO, beamed from the head of the table. But I wasn't nodding. My stomach clenched. 12%? That number felt aspirational. To put it mildly, the preliminary data I'd been reviewing from our core systems, the raw feeds, the actual transaction logs, they told a very different story. A much flatter, less impressive story. There were discrepancies, gaps, figures that seemed artificially inflated. It wasn't just a minor rounding error, it was a chasm. My hand went up, almost involuntarily. Years of training, of instinct, kicked in. You see smoke, you yell fire. Excuse me, Lorne, I said, my voice cutting through the complacent quiet. With all due respect, the figures presented don't align with the source data I've reviewed from the system. Silence. Absolute. Pin-drop silence. Every head swiveled towards me. Lorne Keller froze mid-sentence. His smile faltering. I pressed on, keeping my voice level, professional, but firm. Based on my team's initial audit findings, it appears there may have been, let's call them, aggressive accounting techniques, used to inflate the reported revenue. The actual performance seems significantly flatter. I chose my words carefully, avoiding outright accusation, but the implication was clear: financial manipulation. The air crackled. You could feel the temperature drop 10 degrees. Lorne Keller's face went from pale to flushed, a dangerous shade of crimson creeping up his neck. He stared at me, disbelief warring with fury in his eyes. Then, he forced a tight, condescending laugh. "Susan," he said, his voice dripping with false patience. "Thank you for your diligence. But this is a strategic overview meeting, not an accounting 101 seminar. Perhaps we can take your granular concerns offline?" The dismissal was blatant, the message clear: sit down and shut up. I met his gaze for a beat longer than was comfortable, then slowly lowered my hand. I wouldn't push it further in that room. Not with the CEO right there, clearly backing his CFO. But I wasn't dropping it. This wasn't just granular detail. This was the foundation of our company's perceived health. That evening, working late in my quiet office, the city lights twinkling outside, I did exactly what my job required. I compiled my findings, charts, data comparisons, transaction trails highlighting the inconsistencies. I wrote a formal, detailed email outlining my concerns, attaching the evidence as irrefutable proof. I addressed it directly to the CEO, Barry Winslow, copying HR and the head of the legal department. I hit send, the click of the mouse echoing in the silence. I'd done my duty. I'd raised the red flag through proper channels. Now, it was up to them. 3 days passed. 3 days of unnerving silence. No reply to my email. No follow-up questions. No request for a meeting. Just nothing. Colleagues who usually stopped by my desk for a quick chat suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. Hallway greetings became brief nods. Eyes darting away. The atmosphere around me grew thick with unspoken tension. I felt like a pariah, isolated in plain sight. Then, Thursday afternoon, the summons came. An email from our, curt and impersonal, "Please report to Cynthia Lowell's office immediately." Cynthia was the VP of Human Resources. My heart sank. I knew this wasn't going to be a discussion about my findings. Her office was sterile, impersonal, gray walls, generic corporate art. Cynthia sat behind her large desk, flanked by a lawyer I didn't recognize. Lorne Keller wasn't there. Neither was the CEO, Barry Winslow. They didn't even have the guts to face me themselves. There was no preamble. No, "Thank you for your service." No acknowledgement whatsoever of the detailed report I'd risked my career to submit. Cynthia slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "Susan," she said, her voice flat, avoiding eye contact. "Effective immediately. Your employment with Stratton Dynamics is terminated." I stared at the paper. Termination letter. The reason? Engaging in behavior causing internal instability and negatively impacting employee morale. Internal instability? Employee morale? I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand specifics. I wanted to ask if uncovering potential multi-million-dollar fraud was considered negatively impacting morale. But I knew it was useless. The decision was made. The script was written. I was the problem, not the potentially illegal activity I'd uncovered. Is this because of the email I sent to Mr. Winslow regarding the Q3 financials? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Cynthia finally looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "This decision is final, Susan. It's based on a pattern of behavior deemed detrimental to the collaborative environment we strive for here." A pattern of behavior. Telling the truth was now a detrimental pattern. I felt a cold wave wash over me, a mixture of shock, anger, and profound disillusionment. 9 years of loyalty, of meticulous work, of believing I was doing the right thing for the company. All wiped out in a 5-minute meeting because I dared to question the narrative spun by a powerful executive. They offered a standard severance package, contingent on signing a non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. I refused to sign anything that would gag me. They could keep their severance. My integrity wasn't for sale. Security escorted me back to my desk to pack my personal belongings. A few colleagues averted their eyes, pretending to be engrossed in their screens. Others offered a quick, pitying glance before looking away. Only one person, a junior analyst from my old team, whispered a hurried, "I'm so sorry, Susan. This is wrong," before melting back into the background. The silence from everyone else was deafening. I walked out of the Stratton Dynamics building for the last time, carrying a box filled with 9 years of my professional life. Feeling numb, the Chicago wind whipped around me, cold and indifferent. 47 years old, single, no kids, and now, jobless. All I had was a deep sense of betrayal, a fractured trust in the system I'd dedicated my career to upholding, and a burning ember of anger deep in my gut. They thought they'd silenced me. They thought they'd gotten rid of the problem. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. The first few weeks were a blur of disbelief and anger. Then came a strange, unfamiliar quiet. For the first time in nearly 20 years, my mornings weren't dictated by alarm clocks and commutes. My evenings weren't spent hunched over spreadsheets. The constant pressure, the deadlines, the endless meetings, gone. Replaced by emptiness. I forced myself to rest. Something I hadn't truly done in years. I read novels I'd bought ages ago and never opened. I started a small herb garden on my balcony, finding a surprising solace in the simple act of nurturing life. I took long walks along the lakefront, watching the waves crash against the shore, trying to process the whirlwind that had ejected me from my own life. I even tried meditation, sitting in silence, trying to quiet the storm inside me. But underneath the forced calm, a plan was forming, not a plan for revenge. Exactly, not yet, but a plan to rebuild. To prove, perhaps only to myself initially, that my skills, my integrity, had value outside the walls of Stratton Dynamics. The anger hadn't disappeared, it had simply cooled, solidified into resolve. After about 2 months of this forced sabbatical, I started putting out feelers. I updated my LinkedIn profile, carefully omitting the dramatic exit from Stratton but highlighting my extensive audit and financial analysis experience. I reached out to former colleagues from previous jobs, people I trusted. Slowly, cautiously, I began taking on freelance consulting work. Small gigs at first, helping startups establish internal controls, reviewing financial processes for nonprofits, conducting due diligence for angel investors. The pay wasn't Stratton level. Not even close. It was enough to cover the bills, keep the lights on, but more importantly, it gave me back a sense of purpose, a sense of control. I was my own boss now. My findings went directly to clients who wanted the unvarnished truth. It was liberating. Still, a part of me couldn't completely let go of Stratton Dynamics. I kept tabs, discreetly, followed company news, scanned industry reports, listened to the faint whispers that occasionally reached me through the grapevine. I wasn't wishing for their downfall. Not exactly, but I had a strong suspicion that the rot I'd glimpsed went deep. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that Lorne Keller's manipulated numbers couldn't prop up reality forever. Sooner or later, gravity would assert itself, and I intended to be ready when it did. I kept my files organized, my evidence secure, just in case. It started subtly, about 4 months after my unceremonious departure. A comment on an anonymous employee review site mentioning creative accounting. A hushed rumor among industry analysts about Stratton's surprisingly robust Q3 numbers, questioning their sustainability. Then, The Q4 preliminary results leaked, and they weren't just flat. They were bad, really bad, way below market expectations, and starkly contradicting the optimistic projections Keller had been peddling just months earlier. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Whispers turned into concerned murmurs. A few key institutional investors, the big dogs who actually read the fine print, started asking pointed questions. Why the sudden downturn? What happened to that 12% growth? Had the previous quarter's success been illusory? Then, someone, I still don't know who, maybe that junior analyst, maybe someone else with a conscience, posted anonymously on a popular tech forum and LinkedIn. The post didn't name names. But it didn't need to. It spoke of a toxic culture of silencing dissent, of inflated numbers, and of a senior employee who was fired for trying to expose the truth before things got out of hand. The company I used to work for fired the only person brave enough to call out the lies. It read, "Now, they're reaping what they sowed." That post acted like gasoline on a smoldering fire. It went viral within the Chicago tech community. Industry blogs picked it up. Financial reporters started sniffing around. The carefully crafted facade of Stratton Dynamics began to crack under the pressure. The stock price, which had held relatively steady, suddenly took a nosedive, down 10%, then 15%, then a staggering 18% in a single week. Panic started to set in. The board of directors, previously content to rubber stamp Keller's reports, scrambled into emergency closed-door meetings. The blame game began internally. I heard later. Fingers were pointed. Accusations flew. And then, the biggest domino fell. Barry Winslow. The CEO, the man I had directly warned. The man who presumably signed off on my termination, abruptly resigned. Personal reasons. The official statement said. Nobody believed it. It was clear he was jumping ship before it sank completely. A few days later, an email landed in my personal inbox. Not my consulting address, my personal one. The sender was unfamiliar, someone from the interim leadership team appointed by the board. The subject line simply read, "Urgent matter, Stratton Dynamics." My breath caught. I opened it slowly. "Dear Ms. Susan Miller," it began, polite, almost deferential. "It has come to the board's attention that, prior to your departure, you raised significant concerns regarding potential data inaccuracies in our financial reporting. Given the current challenges the company is facing, we believe your insights could be invaluable. We are seeking an independent, external advisor to assist with a thorough investigation and remediation plan. Would you be open to discussing a potential engagement?" I read it again, and again. They needed me. The irony was so thick, so bitter. I almost laughed out loud. They threw me out like trash for telling the truth. And now that the truth was undeniable and threatening to burn the whole house down, they wanted me to come back and put out the fire. I closed the laptop. I didn't reply immediately. Let them sweat. Let them wonder. Let them understand, just for a little while, what it felt like to be powerless, waiting for someone else to decide your fate. This time, the ball was in my court, and I intended to play it very, very carefully. A week. I let them wait a full week. 7 days of silence, letting the pressure build on their end. Finally, I replied, brief and professional. I agreed to a meeting, but not at their headquarters, not on their turf. I stipulated the meeting be held at the downtown offices of my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman I'd retained shortly after being fired, just in case. The day of the meeting, I walked into that sleek, intimidating law office feeling calmer and more centered than I had in months. They were already there, 3 board members, looking strained and uncomfortable in the unfamiliar, lawyerly environment, along with the interim CEO, a man named Peterson I vaguely recognized from company-wide meetings. Lorne Keller, notably, was absent. I suspected his days were numbered, if not already over. I didn't offer pleasantries. I sat down opposite them, my lawyer beside me, and waited for them to speak. Peterson cleared his throat. Susan, thank you for coming. As you know, the company is facing some significant headwinds. An understatement of epic proportions. We understand you tried to warn us. I cut him off, politely but firmly. Mr. Peterson, let's dispense with the revisionist history. I didn't try to warn you. I did warn you. I provided documented evidence of financial irregularities directly to Mr. Winslow. My reward was termination for causing instability. My voice was level, devoid of emotion, but the words hung heavy in the air. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Good. We acknowledge that mistakes were made in how your concerns were handled. One of the board members mumbled, staring at the polished table. Mistakes were made, I repeated softly, letting the passive phrase hang there. Indeed. I leaned forward slightly. Now, you've asked if I'm willing to help you clean up this mess. The answer is yes, I am. But let's be crystal clear. I am not coming back as an employee. Their eyes widened slightly. I will engage with Stratton Dynamics solely as an independent strategic consultant. I paused, letting that sink in. My firm. I gestured vaguely. Though my firm was currently just me and a laptop, will require complete, unrestricted access to all financial records, internal communications, and personnel relevant to this investigation, going back at least 5 years. Another pause. I looked each of them in the eye. I will assemble my own team of external experts, forensic accountants, data analysts, people I trust, vetted by me, paid by Stratton, but reporting only to me. Peterson started to speak, likely to negotiate, but I held up a hand. And the fee, I continued, my voice dropping slightly, making them lean in. My consulting fee will be $75,000 per month, billed monthly, payable net 15 days, for a guaranteed minimum engagement of 6 months. A sharp intake of breath from one of the board members. $75 a month. $450 total guaranteed. It was an audacious number, far exceeding typical consulting rates. Furthermore, I added, delivering the final blow. Upon successful completion of the initial 6-month remediation phase and stabilization of the company's reporting, I will be granted preferential stock options, equivalent to a senior executive level, at the depressed share price as of today. Silence. Utter, stunned silence. They looked at each other, then back at me, their expressions a mixture of shock, desperation, and grudging respect. They knew they were cornered. They knew the scandal was spiraling. They knew their reputations, and the company's survival, were on the line, and they knew, deep down, that I was probably the only one who could navigate them out of this self-inflicted disaster. Precisely because I knew where the bodies were buried, I was the one who'd tried to tell them about the digging. Peterson exchanged a long look with the lead board member. A slight, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. He turned back to me, his face grim. All right, Susan, he sighed. We agree to your terms. I didn't smile. I simply nodded. My lawyer will draft the agreement. Work begins Monday. Returning to the Stratton Dynamics building. This time not as a supplicant employee but as a high-priced, independent consultant with a mandate from the board. Was surreal. The power dynamic had completely flipped. People who had avoided my gaze 6 months ago now offered tentative smiles, holding doors open. The air of fear and uncertainty was palpable. But this time, it wasn't directed at me. I didn't set up shop in my old office. I requested, and received, a small suite of offices on a separate floor. A neutral territory for my team. And I assembled that team quickly. 4 sharp minds I'd worked with or respected from afar over the years. A forensic accountant with a reputation like a bloodhound. 2 data scientists who could make algorithms sing and weep. And a former SEC investigator who knew exactly what regulators looked for. We were a rapid response unit, built for one purpose: find the truth, quantify the damage, and chart a path forward. The next 2 months were a relentless deep dive into the guts of Stratton Dynamics. We worked grueling hours, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of mission. We pulled server logs, cross-referenced invoices, analyzed sales contracts, interviewed key personnel, many of whom were suddenly very eager to cooperate. Seeing which way the wind was blowing, we traced the tendrils of Lorne Keller's manipulations through years of financial reports. It wasn't just the Q3 numbers, the rot was deeper. More systemic. Inflated revenue projections, prematurely recognized income, hidden liabilities, questionable vendor contracts. It was a masterclass in deceptive accounting. Keller, it turned out, had been under immense pressure from Winslow and the board to maintain unrealistic growth targets. Instead of pushing back, he'd started fudging the numbers. Small adjustments at first, then bolder moves as he got away with it, creating a tangled web of deceit that became harder and harder to unwind. After 8 weeks of intensive work, we had our answer. The total financial damage, the direct cost of the misstatements, regulatory risks, and necessary restatements, was staggering. Nearly $11 million. $11 million evaporated through mismanagement, ego, and a deliberate effort to silence the truth. We presented our findings directly to the board of directors in a closed-door session. No PowerPoint fluff this time. Just cold, hard facts, meticulously documented. The room was silent as we laid out the extent of the deception and the necessary, painful steps for remediation: immediate restatement of financials for the past 3 years, implementation of rigorous new internal controls, termination of several key finance personnel involved. Keller had already been quietly let go, and a comprehensive overhaul of their reporting structure. A few days later, the board held a press conference. They announced the findings, admitted the past wrongdoings, outlined the corrective actions being taken, and tried to reassure investors and the market that Stratton Dynamics was cleaning house and committed to transparency moving forward. I wasn't there. I watched the live stream from my temporary office. I didn't need the public spotlight. I hadn't done this for glory or recognition. I'd done it because it was necessary. I'd done it to correct a wrong. And, perhaps, I'd done it to prove to myself, and to them, that integrity has a price, and sometimes, you have to pay dearly to get it back. The $11 million figure hitting the newswires was vindication enough. The remaining 4 months of my contract were spent overseeing the implementation of the remediation plan, working with the chastened leadership team, installing the new controls, training staff on the updated procedures. The company slowly, painstakingly, began to stabilize. Investor confidence started to tentatively return. The bleeding stopped. As the 6-month mark approached, Peterson, the interim CEO, approached me about staying on permanently. They offered me a newly created Chief Risk Officer position, a hefty salary, more stock options. 6 months earlier, it might have been tempting. A triumphant return, a powerful new role. But something had fundamentally shifted within me during those months of forced exile and subsequent vindication. Stratton Dynamics had survived its crisis, largely thanks to the roadmap I'd provided. But it wasn't my home anymore. The trust was irrevocably broken. I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. Couldn't forget how easily they'd cast me aside when my truth became inconvenient. I politely declined their offer. My work there was done. Instead, I took the substantial consulting fees I'd earned, cashed in a portion of those hard-won stock options once the price recovered slightly, and officially launched my own independent consulting firm, specializing in exactly what Stratton had desperately needed: internal risk assessment, forensic accounting, and whistleblower protection protocols. helping organizations identify and address potential problems before they explode into multi-million-dollar scandals. And ironically, business was booming. The Stratton Dynamics saga, despite my keeping a low public profile, had become something of a case study in the corporate governance world. Companies, spooked by the headlines, suddenly became very interested in ensuring their own houses were in order. My reputation, the blunt, meticulous auditor who wasn't afraid to call out a CFO and ended up saving the company that fired her, preceded me. I had more client inquiries than I could handle. My past became my most powerful marketing tool. So, if you're listening to this story today, maybe you recognize a piece of yourself in it. Maybe you've been in a situation where speaking up felt dangerous, where telling the truth seemed like career suicide. Maybe you did speak up, and you paid a price for it. Here's what I learned: your integrity is not a liability. Your insistence on facts, on honesty, is not a character flaw. It's your strength. It's your armor. In a world that often rewards spin and penalizes candor, holding onto your principles can feel like a lonely battle. But it's the only battle worth fighting. Don't let anyone convince you that being straightforward is a weakness. Don't let them silence you because your truth makes them uncomfortable. Because eventually, reality has a way of catching up. And when it does, the very people who dismissed you, who underestimated you, who threw you under the bus, they might just find themselves knocking on your door, asking for help. Do I regret pointing out Lorne Keller's fabricated numbers? Not for a second. Do I regret sending that email to the CEO? Absolutely not. My only regret? That it took a near catastrophic collapse for them to finally admit I was right all along. This is Revenger Ruby. If you enjoyed this story of calculated payback, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss the next tale of sweet, sweet revenge.